Hi, I'm Steve Barlow. This is the Humanised Workforce Future You podcast video, where we're talking about perceptions of the future, issues that we need to be aware of, and their role in a rapidly changing work and life environment.
Hi, I'm Craig Saffin. The Humanised Workforce Future You podcast series is focused on the key factors evolving to create a more humanised workforce and how people from all walks of life are creating their future selves.
Welcome to the Humanised Workforce Future You podcast. I'm Steve Barlow, and as always, I'm joined by Craig Saffin. How are you, Craig?
Hi, Steve. Very cold morning here in Sydney today. Very cold.
It's cold up here on the Gold Coast too. We've got as our guest today, Andrew Manterfield. So welcome, Andrew. Andrew is joining us from all the way from Tokyo this morning. So it's wonderful to have you here, Andrew. Andrew, do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are, a bit about your background and what you do?
Yeah, sure. I lead my own business, working mainly across Asia Pacific, but it sometimes trickles a bit further. I describe myself as a coach, and I work with people one-to-one, or sometimes I'll coach groups. And what I coach people on is really, I help leaders to be the best they can be every day. That's how I describe my work. I have the pleasure of working with some interesting companies like Google and Facebook. So I've worked in Google's coaching community. I work in Facebook's coaching community. I work with brands companies like Philip Morris, Disney, Mars. I work with a lot of drinks companies, Diageo, Kirin, banks, and healthcare companies. So a broad spectrum, but they're all usually big global companies who are passionate about getting the most from their people. I've done that for 12 years. And before that, I used to work in the drinks industry for Diageo, the company that makes Johnny Walker and Bundaberg in Australia. And I was an HR person for half my career. So about 12 years, did talent in Africa, Asia, Latin America. And I was a generalist in Asia and Australia, New Zealand. And before that, I was a commercial person. So I started off carrying a bag, did most commercial roles, managing accounts. And my last commercial role was as the sales director in the UK, leading a team of 600. So my background's quite diverse.
Yeah, that's amazing, Andrew. Thanks. Yeah, I always have a lot of respect for especially HR professionals who've worked at the front line and run sales teams and so on. I think we interviewed a while back Kathy Doyle, and she also had that same sort of experience. So I'm assuming you're working with a lot of, in what you said, as a lot of CEOs, and in recent times the work environment's changed dramatically. A lot of people working remotely or hybrid or whatever. And what we've learned through this podcast series is that the role of the CEO is changing or has changed. What are your observations about what it requires to be a really good CEO in this environment?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Craig. The skills required seem to be similar. The context is forever changing. So, the move to virtual working, like we are now, for example, when I say to people, it's difficult to work in this, what's it like to work in this environment? And they say it's difficult, they can't connect with people. And I'll say to them, well, think of somebody who can connect, and what do? And they ask questions, they really listen, they engage me through looking at me and, proper listening, 2 eyes, 1 mouth type stuff, right. Twice as much as listening as speaking. And you say, what do they do different when it's face to face? And it's sort of the same. So I think the context changed and the skills are quite similar. The people who were clear on their North Star, their purpose, why they do what they do, I think it helped them. Companies with strong values, behaviors, purpose, vision, they could lean into that through this time of change. If you didn't have it, you ain't got anything to hang on to while the ship's, in that stormy water.
Yeah, over the last few years, we've heard a lot about the purpose and the why. It's become almost as important as probably as important as the strategy for the company. So some of the skills you're talking about there, though, they, as you say, it's nothing new. But what's changed is probably, do you think it's become more imperative, or do you think that some people are struggling to lead with that sort of capability?
Yeah, I think people are struggling because they think it's very different and the skills are different. And the ambiguity, the ambiguity of it all. It's like the current situation in Ukraine. People don't know how long it's going to last. They don't really know what to do. So you see companies that are now saying, right, we're pulling out. But I think those decisions are really difficult, because if you pull out, you're leaving. How do you stay in contact with your workforce who work for you and support them? And how does it reflect your values? And if you stay, how does it reflect your values and your purpose? Yeah. So I think, this is why, and this, I often talk about being courageous.
Yeah.
And, I always remind people that the word courageous comes from the French word cœur, which means heart.
Right.
Because we think of courageous as being muscles, don't we?
Yeah.
And we think about, I've got to be smart in here, but you've got to be smart in here.
Yes.
A lot of the time you've got to follow your intuition. And I think that's hard to do. Trust yourself as a leader is a big deal, I think. Really trust what you think, because sometimes everybody else will think something different.
Do you find, like you've been doing coaching for a long time and interacting with leadership teams and leaders, do you find that this listening skills thing, which is actually not a new thing on the agenda, but now has become much more important, do you find that it's amazing that this discussion keeps going on about how to actively listen or how to really listen to people? Do you think that that's unusual?
Not really, because it amazes me how often it comes up, Craig, if I'm honest. The number of times I'll do work and I'll say, what's the one big takeout? And you'll have a group of 30 people and, half of them will say, I'm going to listen more. And they'll say, I'm going to listen rather than tell, which I think's really interesting. I think the thing that I find interesting is listening for what? And I think people are really listening with curiosity and listening to understand and listening to build engagement. The reason we listen, I think, has probably changed. When I first started working, it was all about knowledge. And the people who were smart, they got the big jobs. So they'd listen for knowledge and listen for insights.
Yeah.
I think now people are listening at a deeper level. And if you're going to engage people, if people don't feel listened to, you may as well go home, aren't you?
How much is trust an aspect of that? Because I'm hearing what you're saying, and I remember early in my career that people would listen, they get the information, and then it wouldn't be unusual to use it against you or to use it to leapfrog over you or something like that to gain an advantage. But what you're talking about is a different paradigm, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think this is Stephen Covey when he talks about trust, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And he talks about the whole idea of not just doing all that good behavior, but then delivering against it. If you listen and you say, yeah, I'll go and look into that, people will remember and they'll expect you to go back and answer. But again, when I first started work, most of the interactions, especially with senior people, were more one way.
Right.
It was them telling you and sharing their wisdom, right. And everybody was sort of sitting there looking up at this person on a pedestal.
Yes.
It's different now, isn't it?
It's
different. You get people who, I remember when somebody telling me a story of the company that they worked in, and the CEO stood up and said, if you've ever got an idea, come and talk to me. Ever got a concern, you want to share something. And this person tells the story of being in head office and getting in the lift and pressing the button to go to the 8th floor, which is where the CEO was. And even when he pressed the button, people started looking at him. And then when he came out the lift and he walked across the floor, secretary started getting up and coming towards him, and eventually somebody stopped him and said, what are you here for? And he said, I've come to see so and so. And they went, I think you'd need to make some time. That's all different, isn't it? Now that's all different. You get people, I know CEOs who blog, and then people put comments on their blogs and stuff. So it's that idea, you're right, the idea of listening, what people expect, I think has changed.
Yeah, one of the things that's always amazed me is when, companies want to hire really smart people, and when they hire the smart people, they want to treat them like mushrooms in a way. So that's sort of counterintuitive. What about so the trust is very important. And one of the other things that's been coming up in our discussions is about this feeling safe. So it's sort of related to what you were just saying, is that, okay, so you're coming up to tell me something, that's great, I've invited you to do that. There's got to be not only trust, but they want to be feeling that that's going to be used positively rather than used against them or disadvantage them, which if you look at whistleblowers and things like that in today's thing, it's quite often it's the whistleblower that comes off the worst, isn't it? So it's sort of the opposite of what we're talking about here, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, psychological safety. I spent 5 years in Google's coaching community when they had an independent coaching community. And obviously they do a lot of work on psychological safety. And then other companies that I work with have followed on from that. And there's some quite simple stuff really about, if you share with skill, and I think that's important, you've got to do it with skill, there shouldn't be any negative consequence. Yeah. And if you're doing it with good intent and it's skillful, you should be able to go, right, this will not affect my career. It won't make people think I'm an idiot if I've asked that question. And I think trying to think that through and create an environment to do that is quite difficult. Because personally, I can think of when I'm in a situation and I'm thinking, can I really say anything I want to say all the time? And I don't think I can, because sometimes I think there's going to be consequence. But if you can create that environment more and more, I think it's extremely powerful because you can get the most out of your people.
Yeah, it's quite true, isn't it? You say, I'd say anything you like, but actually when you think about it from your own perspective, you're not going to say anything you like, right? Yeah, that's the reality. But there's also the thing is you invite feedback, and sometimes the feedback really shocks you, doesn't it? So it's be careful what you wish for, isn't it? So what about leadership teams? You've worked a lot with leadership teams, like you said, how does a CEO, the CEO best interact with that leadership team, or how do they get their purpose and what they're trying to achieve in the organisation through those people? So leading through those people. What is your advice there?
Thanks for watching this video on Humanised Workforce Future You. Please leave a rating or review for the series on the medium where you source your videos.
The transcripts for today's video can be found on craigsutton.com. Please subscribe to the series to avoid missing out on future episodes.